So, I have to justify my outlandish title, otherwise this is just clickbait. Here goes. It's bad enough that this country declines in wealth each year when compared with other countries, but having lost most of our major industries, what's left is being bought up by international companies based in tax havens. I was involved some while ago preparing a contact list of UK companies for a client, only to find out that most of the bigger companies are actually owned by an American or a European parent company, meaning that all the profits go out of this country. I was shocked to discover how many companies that I assumed were British owned were in fact owned and controlled by corporations with deliberately vague names. Now, this is simply not a matter of national pride. There are three issues of concern: jobs, financial security, and national security. So dealing with jobs first. I'll give you an example. Some years ago, an American company bought out a British chocolate manufacturer. I won't name names. The Americans promised that everybody's job would be safe, but as soon as they got control, they fired everyone and simply repackaged the American products for a British market. This has happened thousands of times over the years. So often, the company we see and hear about in the UK is merely a shell staffed by a few relatively low-level managers and maybe a warehouse staff. On the subject of finance, many of these companies, let's take Starbucks as an example, they've got lots of shop fronts and they sell expensive coffee. Each year they make hundreds of millions of pounds in profits from their UK activities. Yet for tax purposes they register a loss. And there are several ways to do this. They purchase their stock through an American company that overcharges them. And they have a licensing agreement with an American parent company that requires them to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in licensing fees. By the way, Google does the same, making billions in the UK in advertising revenue while putting British businesses and companies out of business, but recording sales through an Irish company based in Dublin. I realise that Starbucks and Google are American companies. It just so happens that their tax arrangements are generally in the public domain and are so outrageous they stand out a mile. Other companies are more nebulous and devious. So on the subject of national security, the management and shareholders of these mega corporations feel no loyalty whatsoever to Britain. They don't care if their employment and tax policies damage this country. If our economy were to collapse as a result of their trading methods, they would simply close the UK office and move on. Since the loss of empire, we've transitioned from being a nation of manufacturers, then to agents and middlemen, and now we're just mug punters. Politicians have stood by and watched companies like Amazon and Google shut down the British high street, leaving only charity shops and Turkish barbers laundering money. Little by little, a relatively small group of people have seized control of this country. The people in my other videos I've called the shadow class. These are the people who own and run international megacorporations. The rump of the not yet extinct aristocracy that went underground but didn't die out. The political class, the media class and educationalists, and of course their fellow travellers who are just in it for the salary and a fat pension. This group has coalesced because they've got a number of common characteristic traits. They've got no scientific, technical or entrepreneurial skills, by which I mean they can't invent or make anything that would earn them money. Secondly, they're idle, hence the phrase the idle rich. They don't create, they scheme, intelligence directed at being devious. They operate like an army of occupation. The generals do the deep thinking and give the orders. The politicians create the laws to legalize what they do. The propagandists mold the way the people think and view events. The educationalists get hold of the children before they learn to think for themselves. Their job is to turn people into order takers, not order givers. The educational system was once about setting up young people to go out into the world and win. Then from the 60s onwards, it was about moulding people so they'd fit into society. Now, with primary education entirely under the control of female teachers, it's about turning robust boys into self-doubting sissies. They stay in power. The politicians of all main parties have bought people's votes by extending the benefit system to the extent that a large proportion of the population can make the decision not to work. The combination of all of this, after 50 years of decline and manipulation, is the secret establishment has decided to import a population of more robust males because the crop they've bred are of no use to them. The indigenous white people, the Anglo-Saxons and the Celts, are to be disposed of. As I mentioned earlier, it's a relatively straightforward thing to do in this country because the people in control have no particular affinity or connection with this country. Business, politics and power are all now international. They've got no interest in us, they don't care about us. Before I go on much further, let me just say this. It sounds like a digression, but it's relevant. When I went to what is now Middlesex University in the 1970s, the civil engineering class was required to appoint a representative to the student board, and it was mainly boys, he would deal with the faculty. The overseas student contingent approached me with a view to being the class rep because they didn't feel safe with the arrogant ginger-haired loudmouth who was canvassing for votes for the post. They chose me because I talked to them, the Asians, the Arabs, the Africans, as though they were ordinary guys, whereas the London boys either ignored them or talked down to them. The fact was, I really wasn't interested in student politics. I did say yes, out of politeness, but the other guy garnered all the white votes. He won, much to my relief, so it took the pressure off me. Over 15 years later, when I was running my own company in London, my clients included several Iranian customers, El Al Airlines on Regent Street, a Jewish company of course, the then Iraqi foreign minister who just bought a nice big luxury penthouse in Bayswater, Thai Airlines in Mayfair, a French designer, a Chinese designer, a couple of Jewish clients, I think, and certainly a couple of Caribbean clients. My worst clients, because they never wanted to pay me, were the English ones. I'm saying this to indicate that I've never had the slightest problem with people from foreign lands who come here and make a contribution. And in all of my actions, in all of my life, I think I've proved that. So nobody try the racist card. The plot to replace white Britons sounds like a 1950s horror sci-fi film. The plan is so unspeakably evil and far-fetched that they know the chances of anyone believing it is virtually unthinkable. Up until now, they've been getting away with this, but as we reach the tipping point, some British people have awakened from their slumber. I use that phrase because it's a phrase that John F. Kennedy used when he was in London, when he was a young man, later President of the United States. He used it to warn us that the Nazis were a power to be reckoned with. He said Britain needed to awake from its slumber. Almost 100 years on, we face a similar peril: extinction. Right, before you dismiss all of what I've said, hear me out. Dark forces since the 1980s have been deliberately importing on a massive scale people with no skills or useful attributes from the most chaotic, poverty-stricken, war-torn countries on the planet. We're not talking about diversity here, we're talking about an invasion. The plan is essentially to farm people, a little bit like in the Matrix film. People who work generate GDP, gross national product. That's how China has become rich, directing the population into state-organized industries. However, although China is rich, the individual people are most certainly not. The China model is the one that the shadow class is trying to recreate, and it involves an all-controlling, cruel state apparatus. A big pool of people who must do what they're told, and a government class that has absolute power. You could call it, you could call it capitalism stripped of individualism, or a communism that partly plays the capitalist game. The Labour governments of the 1950s, 60s, 70s tried a version of this central control, but the British people back then were just too awkward to go for it. British steel, British car making, British coal, British railways, they all descended into chaos. So they're going to try again with a new imported group of people and a more effective approach to state control. For a start, democracy has been subverted. It looks the same from the outside, but the fact is, no matter who you vote for these days, at baseline level you get the same policy. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, different political parties had very different policies. But right now there's no substantive difference between Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem or the Greens on one main policy, and that is immigration. By hook or by crook, they all want more. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party are taking it in turns to implement aspects of the same plan. Both Blair, when he was Prime Minister, and now Starmer, have tried to bring in government ID cards. Blair called it joined-up government. Starmer actually tried to argue it was an immigration control measure. He said, no ID, no job. Of course, compulsory national electronic ID has nothing at all to do with immigration control. It's about control in general. Big business is just as oppressive as big government. Nowhere is this more obviously the case than in the newer versions of Microsoft Windows. Once one of the best computer operating systems, the suits at Microsoft are switching to personal information gathering to make more money. After all, they can only sell you an operating system once, but they can extract your private information and sell it on forever. Be safe, switch to a system that has both reliability and privacy at its core. Take a look at Computer Build UK. We only build Linux desktop computers. Linux runs and protects the most important servers on the internet. And it's even more sinister because, following on from the Chinese model, with a national ID, the government can add codes and tags to the ID, denying or adding to each person's respectability index. People who don't show sufficient allegiance to the government will be downgraded, and at the other end of the scale we'll have a system similar to the old Soviet system, whereby the nomenclatura, the names, have extra special privileges and even special shops where they can buy things that are not generally available to the public. Both the Blair government and the Boris Johnson government opened up our borders to anyone, quite deliberately, to generate waves of immigration. Again, let me take you back to the 1980s. That was when the fabric of the plot began to take shape. First of all, we had the Docklands business development, which did in fact include a significant amount of housing, closely followed by the Thames Estuary and the Thames Gateway projects. All these developments envisaged the building of millions of new homes. Interestingly, by the end of the 1960s and early 70s, town planners had decided that the tower block model of home building didn't work. The tower blocks suffered from condensation, rain leaks, people urinating in the lifts, prostitution and drug dealing in the maze of corridors and alleyways. The whole project of sky-high residential buildings was abandoned. If you look at East London redevelopment in the 1970s, everything has been reset to traditional low-rise residential building. Then suddenly, in the 80s, towers were back in fashion, intended to pack people in, and we're back on that agenda. I glanced at the plans at the time. Like everyone else, I assumed this was a plan for dealing with a natural increase in the expected mainland English population. What most of us didn't know back then was that those in the know were considering how to deal with the projected population decrease. The old model of a nuclear family, a husband, a wife, 2.2 children and a dog, was collapsing. And there were two reasons. Women were fed up of being housewives, and this was a stereotypical depiction at the time in TV programs, the so-called kitchen sink dramas. And as the UK economy continued to decline, women were having to go out to work to help support the family. And the result, of course, was fewer children. So if these projections were known by the well-informed few, why was the country setting up to begin construction of a vast new area of East London that would extend right along the shores of the Thames Estuary? There can only be one answer to that. The immigration plot was already in motion. That, I would argue, is my indisputable evidence of the existence of this massive plot. Many million tons of glass and concrete accommodation actually being built for a country with a projected population decline. The evidence is about as solid as you can get. If not a secret, overwhelming immigration plan, why would a government commence building a massive extension to its major city when they were aware of a reducing birth rate? The fact that the enormity of this evil plan has only just come to light doesn't mean it's a recently enacted plan. The current Labour government refers back to Boris Johnson and that era, as though that was when it all started. Back in the mid-1990s, I clearly remember having a discussion with a black guy I then knew in South London. We did some work together. He had a partner, girlfriend, significant other, and 2 young children, and was not in regular employment. I remember asking him at the time if all these new immigrants that were causing a problem around the country were causing a problem for him. And he said they were. Now that was 30 years ago, and it was already well underway. Otherwise, I wouldn't have raised the issue. For nearly 50 years, the immigration football has been passed back and forth from government to government to keep the ball moving forwards. So think about that, 50 years. The current Labour government keeps going on about a housing shortage, as though somehow we don't have enough homes for the British people after all these years. Well, without mass immigration, we would have had more than enough homes for the British people. It's all part of the smoke and mirrors plan. So just to recap, And there's three questions here. Why has it happened? How has it happened? And who made it happen? Number one, why has it happened? People generate wealth. Well, they do normally. I'll come back to that in a minute. Although, of course, if a country has a benefit system that mitigates against people going out to work, then that doesn't work. There's a problem. Let me just say this whole benefits, joblessness and poor economic performance has been created in the first place by both the people and the politicians. There's plenty of blame to go around, but that's a video for another time. So the why part of the argument is the necessary swapping of the population. When the new population is in place, they will drop the current benefit system. A glimpse of this policy was exposed when this Labour government tried reducing pensions for the elderly. The secret establishment just want the old people gone. Put simply, the owners of the international corporations that pretty much run Britain don't want their profits to fall because there are fewer people here to buy their products. It's as simple as that. They want more people, not less. So that's the why. Now the how. Britain is a small island, easy to control and manage. The population has been browbeaten for centuries. Taking control of a country that was part of a large landmass and connected to other countries would be much more difficult. There'd always be a leakage through the borders. In this country, the control mechanisms have been in place for some centuries, and the Second World War brought in a new raft of population controls that haven't entirely been lifted. Being an island, once accustomed to international trade, the population is quite relaxed about the comings and goings in people, in trade, in business ownership. People simply did not realise that the two-way trade flow had gradually become one-way. We now buy in everything. We buy in food, materials, energy. We buy in foreign investment, and we now buy in people. About the only thing we export are the talented and the ambitious. Keir Starmer is on video actually saying, "If you don't like it here, go." That was an outrageous thing to say to a British person born and bred. But within the flood of so many outrages, it goes unnoticed. So that's the why and the how. Now for the who. Due to various emerging technologies and open global markets, vast wealth has been consolidated in the hands of very few people. It's always been the case that money talks. As our country became poorer and our assets of lower value, acquiring them certainly became easily within the reach of this small group of people. We talk about billionaires as individuals and we don't like them, but it's the international megacorporations that wield the trillions and the hundreds of trillions. Quite simply, the UK's wealth and value declined to the level where it was possible to buy up the country and the people in it. There is, however, one other issue that may not have been factored in. This plot, devised over 50 years ago, could not have envisaged the rapid development of both artificial intelligence and robotics. When these combine, we will have intelligent thinking robots. Yes, it's scary, but more to the point, it leaves the plotters and this country with a problem. Tens of millions of unskilled people, outsmarted and outpaced by agile, tireless, mechanical workers. In the future, the GDP will not be measured by the size of the population. Only the technologists who develop the technologies will create the wealth. We'll have 20 or 30 million people, completely surplus to requirements, and it's coming to a district near you. So it turns out that we would have been better off with a small, reasonably well-educated population, rather than an island teeming with people causing trouble. So now these restless, underemployed masses are going to have to be controlled by the most ruthless and harsh methods. And we're all going to be caught up in that. The longer we leave it to act, the worse it will be. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Even now, our government is working on plans to create laws that will allow them to suspend, in inverted commas, social media in times of unrest. I suggest there may be a lot of unrest coming down the line.